conformity of the 1950s will give way to the chaos of the 1960s. Divisions in the country and bold liberal programs to attack social and international problems will lead to a decade of great unrest and really a splitting of what had been a remarkably strong American consensus about how to approach the world. Many had come to demand a more vigorous government as opposed to Eisenhower's kind of hands-off policy. It was referred to at the time as drift. Eisenhower just kind of was, his critics would say, was just letting us go wherever we ended up. JFK and his vice president, LBJ, that's John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson, will come to embody this idea of a bold, active government that is stepping in and directly handling problems. In 1960, we had two young candidates. We don't realize this today, but Nixon was only slightly older than Kennedy, and Kennedy was one of the youngest people ever to be nominated for president, as well as the youngest ever to be elected president. Roosevelt was younger when he became president, but he moved up from vice president. Nixon promised mild reforms, but basically a continuation of the Eisenhower era. Remember, he was Eisenhower's vice president, so that makes sense. But JFK was able to unite a divided party after a tough battle with LBJ, LBJ representing the Southern Democrat wing of the party, or the Dixiecrat wing, which will be ironic later, with JFK representing the Northeastern wing of the party. And it was a bitter primary. JFK had almost become the Democratic candidate in 1956, but he does win the nomination in 1960, and he chooses LBJ as his vice president to try to keep the South in the Democratic camp. JFK is an attractive, articulate guy. He's a senator. He's a war hero. He's the son of the controversial Joe Kennedy, who had made his money, despite what you may have heard, in Hollywood, in the movies. The two main issues in the debate are, for some reason, JFK's youth. Now, JFK was very young, and I understand why that was an issue. But again, Nixon was only a little bit older. But of course, Nixon did have a lot of experience. He had been vice president for 8 years, after all. The other big issue was religion. Kennedy was a Catholic, and America had never elected a Catholic president. In fact, only one Catholic, Al Smith, for the Democrats back in 1928, had ever received the nomination of their party. But that was a big concern. People were worried that Kennedy would serve the Pope and not necessarily the American people. And he had to go give a major speech addressing this. It was also the first election where TV is going to really play a decisive role. In the first presidential debate ever, it's often referred to as the first televised presidential debate, but it was the first presidential debate, period. Kennedy and Nixon will go on TV, and the mythology is, and there's no real way to prove this, is that Kennedy looked a lot better on TV. He had makeup on, for one thing. He was a more attractive man, a younger looking man. And Nixon did not look good on TV. But anyway, here's a little bit of that debate so you can judge for yourself.
I think we can do a better job. I think we're going to have to do a better job if we are going to meet the responsibilities which time and events have placed upon us. We cannot turn the job over to anyone else. If the United States fails, then the whole cause of freedom fails. And I think it depends in great measure on what we do here in this country.
Kennedy, who wins the election barely in the popular vote, only by 0.1%, but he wins it relatively comfortably in the electoral vote, as you can see, will propose a set of progressive reforms he calls the New Frontier. The problem is Congress is dominated by a GOP, by a Republican minority, as well as that group of Dixiecrats, conservative Democrats, and they essentially stop Kennedy from accomplishing most of what he wants to do. And they do what they want to do, which is to cut tariffs and taxes. Kennedy, with his famous brothers, Teddy and Bobby, and his beautiful wife, Jackie Kennedy there, and his adorable children, will be something of a cult of personality. And people will be perhaps more interested in Kennedy as a person than as a president, which is something fairly new in American history. Part of that has to do with the media, but part of that has to do with him being a younger, attractive, photogenic guy. Here he is in one of his more famous moments from his inaugural address.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
Like FDR, Teddy Roosevelt, and later Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, Kennedy is something of a cult of personality, where he is in the public imagination in some ways bigger than the office. And part of that, of course, is his family life. There's John, his son, who will tragically die himself in a plane crash a few decades later, and Kennedy at the office. But the people really ate this stuff up. It was maybe the first time they really got this sort of inside look into the president's life, and we were obsessed with it. Of course, tragically, as I'm sure you know, in Dallas on November 21st of 1963, President Kennedy will be assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. The death of the president, of course, the assassination of the president, shocked and horrified the nation. The whole situation became more convoluted and confusing when the president's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, we're not dealing with conspiracy theories here, put them in the comments below, but this is for an AP class, so I'm not getting into that. But the president's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was himself assassinated by a Dallas nightclub owner, Jack Ruby. This, by the way, was caught on television, and I believe this is the first time in history that a killing was carried live on television.
Madness and hate erupt anew in Dallas as President Kennedy's accused assassin is shot down himself during a jail transfer. There's an ominous symbol in Lee Harvey Oswald's murder weapon as he is taken to the city jail basement where an armored car is to move him to a maximum security cell. Oswald walks his last mile. His assailant moves in from the right.
There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
Now, from another camera, the motion is slowed. The murderer moves in, and here is the shame of all America as Jack Rubenstein takes the law unto himself.
Why did Jack Ruby do it? Well, we really don't know, because he himself will die very shortly thereafter from liver failure, if I remember right. There's a massive congressional investigation into this. It's called the Warren Commission, and it concludes that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Of course, there have been conspiracy theories ever since, pointing fingers in all sorts of directions about who really killed JFK, but none of those have been confirmed, and I'm sure the comments will fill up with those shortly. Regardless of who killed Kennedy or why, in the end, what it meant was that in November of 1963, the vice president, the Texan, Lyndon Baines Johnson, will become the president.